Judging people is wrong. It's wrong to be judgmental, and it's right not to be judgmental. People who judge are bad people, and people who don't judge are good people. You should be someone who doesn't judge, and you shouldn't be someone who does judge. These are really commonly held beliefs, but there's one big problem. Every single one of those statements was a moral judgment. If you say them and believe them, then you are guilty of judging other people, and therefore the thing that you're condemning and supposedly rejecting. In other words, that's hypocrisy. For the record, I believe it's wrong to judge other people too, and this is something I actually have to work really hard at to not fall into. But if this idea is so fraught with contradiction, how can it be true? I think we first have to understand the origins of this belief and to put it into its proper context with how we understand it and apply it today. And the best known introduction I can think of comes from Jesus Christ's teaching, where he said, "Do not judge so that you will not be judged." But if you interpret that the way most people do today, that teaching doesn't really make sense, because Jesus spent a lot of time telling people how they ought to live their lives, which today would be condemned as being judgmental. So what is the distinction? I recently caught myself doing something that I had just instinctively done for the longest time, and I never really asked myself why I do that. Specifically, it happens when I'm driving and I see another driver do something goofy. Maybe they get trapped in an intersection when they're supposed to be turning left, or they cut somebody off, or they don't obey the rules, or they don't know how to lane change, or they don't know how to merge. Whenever I would see somebody driving poorly in traffic, I had this habit of making sure that whenever I got the opportunity to, I would look at them. I would drive past their driver's side and get a good look at that person. And I never really asked myself why I did that, but I realized that what I was actually doing was sizing them up. I was taking that small bit of information I had about them, which was their driving performance in that narrow window that I was able to observe it, and I was comparing that to what I saw in that person. And I'm really embarrassed to admit this, but I was then filling in all kinds of blanks about them and using that to form generalizations about people. So for example, if they were a certain gender, if they were a certain age, if they were a certain ethnicity, I was going to start to package all of that together and use that to say, oh, that's why they did that, because people like that drive poorly. This is a kind of judgmentalism where we take some very limited perspective we have about another person or some circumstance, and then we fill in all the blanks ourselves and conclude that that's enough to know all we need to know about them. Sadly, and again, this is really embarrassing for me to admit when I catch myself doing this kind of thinking is what underpins a lot of the fear and hatred of other people in our world. We find out some very limited thing about another person, and then we assume the worst about them in all the other respects. Wars, political oppression, sexism, racism, these are all manifestations of this kind of judgmentalism. Like, wars wouldn't be possible if people didn't assume the absolute worst about people on the opposing side. I mean, how else would you be able to kill another human being? It couldn't possibly be that we have more in common based on our shared humanity. No, all I need to know about you is your political beliefs, or your ethnic background, or your religion, and I know that's enough to tell me you're evil. The point is, that's not enough to know all you need to know about somebody, and it's certainly not enough to judge them or condemn them. Does that mean we can never judge another person's actions as being wrong? No. All it means is that you can't fill in the blanks and assume you know everything you need to know about them, including their psychology, their history, their motives, or their emotional state. All you know is that they did something that's wrong, and that's fair. But what you don't know is how culpable they are for the thing that they did. You can make that assessment without being guilty of the kind of judgmentalism that Jesus condemned. That's just called having moral values. Because it's impossible to have moral values without also being able to judge another person's actions against those moral values. So let me end by saying it's good to have moral values, but this self-contradictory idea of not judging others has grown so fanatical that we've gotten into the habit of accusing people of hatred simply for having moral values and upholding them. Considering another person's actions as contrary to your moral values is not the same as hating them, and we need to stop equating those two things. Hatred is a real thing, and we need to be fighting against it. But when we equate it with simply having moral values, then we water it down and we trivialize it and we turn it into something that isn't a big concern. And when that happens, that compromises our ability to recognize it and to fight against it. So let's please stop doing that. An important distinction to remember is that tolerance and love and acceptance needs to always be shown for other people, but it does not need to be shown for behaviors or ideas. Behaviors and ideas do not have inherent dignity, and therefore we do not owe them respect. By contrast, people do have inherent dignity, and so we do need to show them love and tolerance and respect. And it's important that we are able to make that distinction. Thank you so much for watching. We're going to try and make one of these videos a few times a month, and hopefully we can get it up to about once a week. And they're going to be about topics that are interesting to me and hopefully interesting to you too. And so if they are, please subscribe and come find me on Twitter and elsewhere, and stay tuned. And then we fill in all the blanks about them as if that's enough to, why is that turning on?